Emotional reunion. CEO cries after seeing abandoned wife next to twins after 5 years. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories, my beloved readers. While you were busy enjoying Christmas, I was hard at work crafting a new story just for you. Tell me, where did you spend your Christmas day? Did you enjoy it? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And here's a small Christmas gift I'd like to ask for. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world to me. Now let's dive into today's story. The morning sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maximilian Maverick's corner office, painting golden streaks across the mahogany desk where he sat reviewing the latest quarterly reports. At 28, he had already achieved what many spent lifetimes pursuing. His doula and lactation consulting empire, Maverick Family Care, stood as an undisputed leader in maternal health care services across the city. The office itself was a testament to his success. Contemporary art pieces adorned the walls, each carefully selected to project an image of sophisticated taste and cultural refinement. A series of awards and certifications lined the eastern wall, their glass surfaces catching the morning light and throwing prismatic patterns across the plush carpeting. The view beyond his windows showcased the city's skyline, a concrete and glass landscape that seemed to bow before the Maverick family's influence. Maximilian loosened his perfectly knotted tie slightly as he examined the latest expansion proposals. His business acumen had transformed what was once a small family practice into a revolutionary approach to maternal care, combining traditional wisdom with cutting-edge medical science. Under his leadership, Maverick Family Care had expanded from a single office to a network of clinics spanning the entire metropolitan area, each facility maintaining the same exceptional standards of care that had become synonymous with the Maverick name. A gentle knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Maverick," his assistant Sarah announced, "your mother is here to see you." The mere mention of his mother caused Maximilian to straighten instinctively, adjusting his tie back to its pristine position. Eleanor Maverick had that effect on people. Her presence demanded perfection. Eleanor swept into the office with the grace of old money, her Chanel suit and perfectly coiffed silver hair representing generations of cultivated refinement. "Darling," she greeted, air-kissing both his cheeks. "I trust you're preparing for the Thompson-Wheeler merger discussion?" Maximilian nodded, gesturing for his mother to take a seat in one of the leather armchairs facing his desk. "The preliminary paperwork is already with our legal team. We should be ready to proceed by next week." "Excellent." Eleanor's approval came with a slight smile. "Your father would have been proud to see how you've expanded his vision." The mention of his late father sent a familiar pang through Maximilian's chest. Richard Maverick had built the foundation of their empire, transforming his medical practice into a respected institution before his untimely passing 5 years ago. "The board is particularly impressed with your initiative to integrate mental health services into our standard care package," Eleanor continued, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the arm of her chair. "Though I must say, some of the old guard raised eyebrows at the idea of offering services to less conventional family structures." Maximilian suppressed a sigh. He knew exactly what his mother meant. Maverick Family Care had traditionally catered to an exclusive clientele, primarily wealthy, traditional families. His decision to expand their services to single mothers, same-sex couples, and lower-income families had caused quite a stir among the board members. "The numbers speak for themselves, Mother," he replied, pulling up a chart on his tablet. "Our inclusive approach has actually strengthened our market position. We're seeing a 40% increase in client retention and a 65% growth in referrals." Eleanor's expression remained carefully neutral. "Numbers aren't everything, darling. The Maverick name has always stood for certain values." She paused, examining her son with calculating eyes. "Which reminds me, The Ashworth's daughter Victoria has recently returned from her studies in Europe. Perhaps we should arrange a dinner." The suggestion hung in the air like heavy perfume. Maximilian was well aware of his family's expectations regarding his personal life. At 28, he was considered overdue for a suitable marriage, one that would cement the Maverick family's social standing and ensure the continuation of their legacy. "I'm rather busy with the expansion plans," he deflected, turning his attention back to the documents on his desk. "We're looking at potential locations in the southern states, particularly Alabama. The market research shows promising opportunities in regions with limited access to premium maternal care services." Alabama. Eleanor's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched in surprise. "Darling, surely there are more appropriate locations for expansion. The Maverick brand has always been associated with sophisticated urban centers." Maximilian met his mother's gaze steadily. "Times are changing, Mother. Our success lies in adapting while maintaining our standards of excellence. The southern expansion could open up entirely new markets for us." Eleanor rose gracefully, smoothing her skirt. "Just remember, darling, everything you do reflects on the family name. We've spent generations building our reputation." She reached out to adjust his tie, a gesture that made him feel like a schoolboy despite his position. "The Thompson-Wheeler merger will bring us closer to the right social circles. Do try to attend the charity gala next weekend. Victoria will be there." After his mother's departure, Maximilian stood at his window watching the city buzz below. His reflection stared back at him. Perfectly tailored suit, expertly styled hair, the very image of a successful young executive. Yet something felt hollow about it all, a gnawing emptiness that neither his achievements nor his family's approval seemed to fill. His eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk, his father standing proudly in front of their first clinic, his dream of helping mothers and families realized in brick and mortar. Richard Maverick had built something meaningful, something beyond mere profit margins and social status. Despite his family's current focus on exclusivity and prestige, Maximilian knew his father's true vision had been about making a real difference in people's lives. The expansion plans for Alabama lay open on his desk, representing more than just business growth. They represented a chance to step beyond the golden cage of expectations that had defined his life. Little did he know that this decision would lead him down a path that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of legacy. Picking up the phone, he dialed his project manager. "Book the flight to Magnolia Springs," he instructed, his voice firm with decision. "I want to survey the potential locations personally." As he ended the call, the morning sun caught the Crystal Award on his desk. Healthcare Innovator of the Year. The prismatic light scattered across his office walls, creating patterns that seemed to dance with possibility. Maximilian Maverick stood at the threshold of change, though he didn't yet know it. His empire was secure, his path seemingly set in stone, but fate had other plans, plans that would begin to unfold in a small town in Alabama, where a chance encounter would shatter his perfectly ordered world and force him to question everything he'd ever believed about love, family, and the price of following one's heart. The heavy weight of the Maverick legacy rested on his shoulders as he gathered the documents for his next meeting. His world was about to change, but for now he remained the perfect heir, carrying his family's expectations with practiced grace, unaware that his greatest challenge and his greatest happiness waited just beyond the horizon, in a place far from the sophisticated world he'd always known. The day continued like any other, filled with meetings, decisions, and the constant pressure of maintaining the Maverick family's exacting standards. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, A small voice whispered of something more, something real, something worth fighting for. That voice would soon grow louder, challenging every principle he'd been raised to uphold, every expectation he'd been trained to meet, and every boundary his family had carefully constructed around his life. As evening fell over the city, Maximilian remained in his office, the sole figure in the darkening building, surrounded by the trappings of success, yet haunted by an inexplicable longing for something more authentic than the gilded cage of his privileged existence. The coming weeks would test his courage, challenge his convictions, and ultimately lead him to a love that would defy every expectation his family had ever placed upon him. The skyline twinkled with thousands of lights, a glittering reminder of the world he commanded. Yet the true light, the one that would illuminate his path to happiness, awaited him in Magnolia Springs, where a young woman named Meadow would soon turn his carefully ordered world upside down, teaching him that true love knows no boundaries and that some things are worth risking everything for. Chapter 2. Magnolia's Promise. Magnolia Springs welcomed spring like a gracious southern belle welcoming her favorite guests. The historic town square bloomed with life as morning light filtered through centuries-old oak trees, their branches draped in Spanish moss that swayed gently in the Alabama breeze. The air carried the sweet perfume of magnolia blossoms, mixed with the earthy scent of fresh coffee from Mason's Corner Cafe, where Maximilian sat reviewing property listings for his business expansion. He'd chosen a table outside, his usual tailored suit feeling oddly formal among the casual charm of the small town. The porcelain cup before him contained coffee far better than any he'd tasted in his city's premium establishments, though he'd never admit that to his mother. 3 days into his visit, and already the slow rhythm of southern life had begun to crack the polished veneer he'd spent years perfecting. That's when he first saw her. Meadow stood beneath the town square's central gazebo, surrounded by a small group of tourists. The morning sun caught her profile, illuminating her in a way that made Maximilian forget the property reports spread before him. She wore a simple sundress, its soft yellow fabric dancing around her knees in the spring breeze. Her natural beauty needed no enhancement. Her smile alone lit up the historic square more brilliantly than any diamond his mother had ever worn. And this gazebo, her voice carried across the square, clear and warm like honey, has witnessed over 200 years of Magnolia Springs history. Local legend says any promise made here is blessed by the spirits of all the love stories that came before. Maximilian found himself drawn to her voice, the way it wrapped around each word like a gentle embrace. Her tour group hung on every syllable, enchanted not just by the stories she told, but by the genuine passion with which she told them. She wasn't simply reciting historical facts. She was weaving magic with her words, breathing life into every stone and timber of the old town. As if sensing his gaze, Meadow turned slightly and their eyes met across the sun-dappled square. Time seemed to pause, the morning air crackling with something electric and undefined. She didn't look away immediately, as most would when caught in a stranger's stare. Instead, she held his gaze for a moment that felt both fleeting and eternal, her smile deepening just enough to create a dimple in her left cheek. The spell broke when one of her tour group asked a question, drawing her attention back to her duties. Maximilian watched as she gracefully guided her group toward the old courthouse, her movements as fluid as the story she was telling about the building's role in civil rights history. Without conscious thought, he found himself gathering his papers and following at a discreet distance. Her voice drew him like a siren's song, but it wasn't just her beauty that captivated him. It was the way she spoke about justice and progress, weaving contemporary relevance into historical tales. Her intelligence shone through every carefully chosen word, every thoughtful response to her group's questions. The tour wound through the historic district, past antebellum homes with their sweeping verandas and meticulously maintained gardens. Meadow painted pictures with her words, helping her audience see beyond the preserved facades to the complex human stories they contained. She spoke of both triumph and tragedy, of progress and persecution, handling difficult historical topics with grace and honesty that impressed Maximilian deeply. As the tour approached its end, returning to the town square, Maximilian realized he'd completely forgotten about his business meeting scheduled for the afternoon. He'd been so entranced by Meadow's historical narrative that the carefully ordered world of profit margins and market expansion had momentarily ceased to exist. The tour group dispersed, leaving Meadow alone beneath the ancient oak trees. She turned, unsurprised to find Maximilian still there. "You followed the whole tour," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Did you learn anything interesting about our little town?" "Everything," he replied, then caught himself. "I mean, you have a remarkable way of bringing history to life." He extended his hand, feeling oddly nervous, an emotion foreign to someone who regularly negotiated million-dollar deals. "Maximilian Maverick." "Meadow," she responded, her hand fitting perfectly in his. "Just Meadow." The simplicity of her introduction struck him. No pretense, no family name, weighted with generations of expectations. Just Meadow, as natural and refreshing as the spring breeze that carried the scent of magnolias around them. "Would you join me for coffee?" The words left his mouth before his usual careful consideration could stop them. "I'd love to hear more about Magnolia Springs. My company is considering expanding here, and your insight would be invaluable." It wasn't entirely a lie. He did need to understand the community better, but they both knew this was about more than business research. Meadow considered him for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. "Mason's has the best peach cobbler in 3 counties, she said finally, "and I just finished my last tour of the morning." Her smile held a hint of mischief that made Maximilian's heart skip a beat. They settled at his previous table, now dappled in the shifting shadows of oak leaves. Meadow ordered coffee and the promised peach cobbler, while Maximilian found himself setting aside his phone, ignoring the mounting notifications from his office. Something about her presence demanded genuine attention, making the usual distractions of his busy life seem suddenly insignificant. "So, Mr. Maverick," she began, stirring her coffee, "what brings a big city healthcare mogul to our quiet corner of Alabama?" There was no judgment in her tone, only genuine curiosity and perhaps a touch of gentle teasing at his formal attire. "Please call me Max," he said, surprising himself with the informality. Nobody called him Max. He'd always been Maximilian, upholding the dignity of the Maverick name. But here, under the Alabama sun, with Meadow's eyes twinkling at him over her coffee cup, he felt the layers of formality beginning to peel away. Their conversation flowed as naturally as the nearby river, meandering through topics both profound and playful. Meadow's knowledge extended far beyond local history. She spoke passionately about healthcare accessibility in rural communities, about the importance of preserving both natural and cultural heritage, about her dreams of making a difference in her community. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the square when they finally realized how much time had passed. Maximilian had missed all his meetings, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care. Something more important was happening here, something that made boardrooms and business strategies seem pale and lifeless in comparison. As they stood to leave, a sudden gust of wind scattered magnolia petals around them like nature's own confetti. One landed in Meadow's hair, and without thinking, Maximilian reached out to brush it away. His fingers grazed her cheek, and that simple touch sent electricity through his entire being. "You know," Meadow said softly, "you never actually asked me about the best locations for your business expansion." Her eyes held a knowing look that saw right through his professional pretense. "I suppose I found something more interesting to discuss," he admitted, feeling more honest than he had in years. Standing there in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by the historic heart of Magnolia Springs, Maximilian Maverick, heir to a healthcare empire, bearer of generations of expectations, felt himself falling. Not falling from grace, as his family might see it, but falling into something real, something true, something that all his wealth and status couldn't begin to compare to. Meadow's smile held the warmth of the southern sun itself as she said, "Same time tomorrow? I have a morning tour, but after that I know a few more places you might want to see, places that never make it into the official tours." "I'd like that," Maximilian replied, knowing with absolute certainty that his life had just changed irrevocably. The business expansion that had brought him to Magnolia Springs suddenly felt like destiny rather than strategy, as if every decision in his life had been leading him to this moment, to this square, to Meadow. As he watched her walk away, her yellow sundress catching the late afternoon light, Maximilian understood that he'd found something he didn't even know he was looking for. In this small town, far from the prestigious world he'd always known, a new story was beginning, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, worth, and the true meaning of success. The magnolia trees stood witness, their ancient branches swaying gently in the evening breeze, as another love story began beneath their watchful gaze. In the heart of Magnolia Springs, where every promise made was said to be blessed by the spirits of love stories past, Maximilian and Meadow's tale was just beginning to unfold, as natural and unstoppable as the changing of seasons. Chapter 3. Love Against All Odds. The weeks that followed their first meeting unfolded like pages from a love story written by the stars themselves. Maximilian found himself extending his stay in Magnolia Springs, offering his office increasingly creative explanations for his prolonged absence. Each dawn brought new adventures with Meadow. Each sunset found them more deeply entwined in a love that defied the careful boundaries of his former life. Their mornings often began at Mason's Corner Cafe, where Maximilian had long abandoned his tailored suits for casual button-downs and rolled sleeves. Meadow would arrive with wind-blown hair and stories from her early tours, her eyes sparkling with the same enthusiasm that had first captured his heart. The locals had begun to smile knowingly when they passed, watching the unlikely pair with a mixture of curiosity and approval. "Tell me again about your dreams," Maximilian would say, watching her stir honey into her coffee. He never tired of hearing her speak about her passions, the way she envisioned making healthcare accessible to every mother in rural Alabama, how she wanted to bridge the gaps between communities divided by history and circumstance. "You're the first person who's ever really listened," Meadow confessed one morning, reaching across the table to touch his hand. The simple gesture sent warmth cascading through his entire being. "Most people hear tourist guide and assume that's all there is to know about me." Their days were filled with secret adventures that Meadow called the real Magnolia Springs tour. She took him to hidden spots that never made it into the official guidebooks. A secluded bend in the river where century-old cypress trees dipped their branches into crystal-clear water, an abandoned antebellum garden where wild roses had overtaken formal hedges, creating a magical maze of blooms and brambles. One particularly memorable afternoon, she led him to an old jazz club on the outskirts of town. The building looked abandoned from outside, but inside, local musicians gathered for informal sessions that filled the air with soulful melodies. Meadow pulled him onto the makeshift dance floor, teaching him to move without thinking about proper form or appearance. "Stop trying to lead," she laughed, her bare feet moving gracefully on the worn wooden boards. "Just feel the music, Max. Not everything needs to be controlled." That night, as they swayed together in the golden light of sunset streaming through dusty windows, Maximilian realized he was experiencing a freedom he'd never known existed. The weight of the maverick legacy, so heavy on his shoulders for all these years, seemed to lift when Meadow was in his arms. Their evenings often found them at the old gazebo in the town square, sharing dreams and fears under a canopy of stars. Meadow spoke of her childhood, raised by a single mother who taught her that true worth had nothing to do with social status. Maximilian opened up about the suffocating expectations of his family, the carefully orchestrated life that had never felt truly his own. "Sometimes I wonder," he confessed one night, his head in her lap as she ran fingers through his hair, "if I've ever made a single decision that wasn't influenced by the maverick name." "You're here now," Meadow reminded him softly. "With me. I'm pretty sure that wasn't in your family's grand plan." The truth of her words struck him deeply. Every moment with Meadow was a choice. His choice, and it filled him with both terror and exhilaration. His phone buzzed constantly, with messages from his mother, questioning his extended absence, reminding him of responsibilities back home. Each time, he found it easier to let the calls go to voicemail, to choose another sunset with Meadow instead. Their love bloomed like the wild magnolias that gave the town its name, natural, unstoppable, and completely indifferent to the careful pruning of society's expectations. They made love for the first time in Meadow's small apartment above the local bookstore, where mismatched furniture and walls covered in local art spoke of a life lived authentically. The moonlight streaming through gauzy curtains painted patterns on their skin as they discovered each other with trembling hands and whispered promises. The proposal wasn't planned. They were walking along the river at dusk, discussing their future in careful terms, both aware of the challenges that lay ahead. Meadow had been telling him about a local legend of lovers who had defied their families to be together, their story preserved in the town's oral history. "They say the couple left everything behind," she said, skipping stones across the water's surface. "Their families, their inheritance, their social standing, all for love." She looked at him then, her eyes holding a question she was too proud to ask. Maximilian caught her hand, pulling her close. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, nature itself providing a backdrop for this moment. "Marry me," he whispered against her hair. "I don't want any life that doesn't have you in it." Meadow pulled back to search his face, her eyes wide with surprise and something deeper. "You know what that would mean," she said carefully. "Your family, your position." "None of it matters," he interrupted, dropping to one knee on the riverbank. He had no ring, nothing about this was planned, but he'd never been more certain of anything in his life. "You've shown me what real love looks like, Meadow. Not the carefully arranged marriages of my world, not the business alliances disguised as relationships. Just love. Pure and simple and terrifying in its power. Marry me. Today, tomorrow, whenever you're ready. Just say yes." Tears sparkled in her eyes as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she breathed against his lips, "1,000 times yes." They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony in the town square gazebo. Meadow wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of wild magnolias. Maximilian had never seen anything more beautiful. A local judge performed the ceremony while the town's residents gathered to witness what they would later call the greatest love story Magnolia Springs had seen in generations. No one from Maximilian's family attended. There hadn't been time to notify them, they told themselves, though both knew the truth was more complicated. But as they exchanged vows under the ancient oak trees, with golden afternoon light filtering through Spanish moss like nature's own wedding decorations, none of that seemed to matter. "I promise to love you without condition or reservation," Maximilian vowed, his voice carrying across the hushed square. "To choose you every day, to stand beside you against any storm that comes our way." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. Purchased that morning from the local jeweler, nothing like the elaborate family rings waiting in vaults back home. Meadows' vows were equally moving, spoken with the same passionate conviction she brought to everything in her life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to help you find and keep your freedom, to love you not for your name or your position, but for the beautiful soul you've shown me. The kiss that sealed their union was met with cheers and applause from the gathered townspeople who had watched their love story unfold over the past weeks. Mason's Corner Cafe provided a wedding cake, and someone brought out fiddles and guitars for an impromptu celebration that lasted well into the night. As they danced under the stars, holding each other close while fireflies danced around them like nature's own wedding lights, both knew that challenges lay ahead. The world outside Magnolia Springs wouldn't understand or accept their union easily. Maximilian's family would be furious, society would whisper, and hard choices would have to be made. But in that moment, swaying together in the warm southern night, none of that seemed to matter. They had chosen love over convention, authenticity over expectation, and the power of that choice filled them both with a courage they never knew they possessed. "No regrets," Meadow whispered against his chest as the celebration wound down, the last dancers heading home under a canopy of stars. Maximilian tightened his arms around her, breathing in the scent of magnolias in her hair. "Only that I didn't find you sooner," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Every moment before you feels like wasted time." They spent their wedding night in Meadow's apartment, making love as a warm breeze carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine through open windows. The future was uncertain, but their love felt unshakable, a force as natural and powerful as the river that flowed through their town. Neither could know then that their fairy tale would soon face its greatest test, that the world they'd temporarily held at bay would come crashing in with all its prejudices and expectations. But for that night, wrapped in each other's arms, they were simply two souls who had found their other half, two hearts beating in perfect synchronicity under the watchful gaze of southern stars. Chapter 4. The Weight of Legacy. The Maverick family estate loomed before them like a fortress of old money and rigid expectations, its Georgian columns and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the warm simplicity of Magnolia Springs. Maximilian felt Meadow's hand tighten in his as they approached the massive front doors, their wedding bands catching the late afternoon sun, silent declarations of defiance against the world they were about to face. "Ready?" he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was asking her or himself. The past week of newlywed bliss in their small-town haven had felt like a beautiful dream. Now, reality awaited behind those imposing doors. Eleanor Maverick's reaction to their marriage announcement had been predictably icy. The phone call had lasted exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds, ending with a command rather than a request: "Bring her to dinner." Thursday, 7 o'clock sharp. The tone left no room for negotiation. The door opened before they could ring the bell, revealing Harrison, the family butler who had known Maximilian since childhood. His usually warm eyes held a hint of worry as he greeted them. "Mr. Maverick, Mrs. Maverick," he said, the latter title causing Eleanor's voice to carry sharply from the drawing room. "Send them in immediately, Harrison." The drawing room was a museum of old wealth, Persian rugs, antique furniture, and oil paintings of stern-faced Maverick ancestors watching from gilt frames. Eleanor stood by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in her perfectly manicured hands, while various family members were strategically positioned around the room like pieces on a chessboard. "Maximilian," Eleanor's voice cut through the silence, "I see you've finally decided to grace us with your presence." Her eyes swept over Meadow with calculating precision, taking in every detail from her simple dress to her natural beauty. "And this is your impulsive decision?" Maximilian felt his jaw tighten. "Mother, this is Meadow, my wife, Meadow, my mother, Eleanor Maverick." The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Victoria, sitting primly on the antique settee, made a small sound that might have been a gasp or a scoff. Uncle Richard, Eleanor's younger brother and the family's legal advisor, studied them with narrowed eyes while absently swirling his brandy. "Well," Eleanor finally said, her smile not reaching her eyes, "shall we move to the dining room? The chef has prepared something special for this occasion." The grand dining room, with its 20-foot ceilings and crystal chandelier, felt more like a courtroom than a place for family dinner. Meadow was seated far from Maximilian, a deliberate arrangement that put her between Aunt Victoria and Cousin Margaret, known for their particularly sharp tongues. "So, dear," Victoria began as the first course was served, "tell us about your background. What exactly does your family do?" Meadow met her gaze steadily. "My mother raised me alone after my father passed. She worked as a nurse, taught me the value of hard work and compassion." "How quaint," Margaret interjected, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "It must be quite overwhelming, suddenly finding yourself in our world. All these rules of etiquette, social expectations. It's a lot to take in for someone of your background." Maximilian started to speak, but Eleanor cut him off. "Margaret has a point, darling. Our world comes with certain responsibilities, expectations. The Maverick name carries weight in society. Our actions affect not just ourselves, but countless employees, business partners, charitable organizations." "Meadow understands responsibility," Maximilian defended. "She's dedicated her life to preserving history and building bridges between communities. Her work as a tour guide—" "A tour guide," Uncle Richard interrupted, setting down his wineglass with deliberate care. "How fascinating. Tell me, Maximilian, how do you envision introducing your wife, a tour guide from Alabama, to the hospital board, to our major investors, to the families we've been allied with for generations?" "The same way I'll introduce her to everyone else, as my wife, whom I love and respect," Maximilian replied firmly, though he felt the first seeds of doubt being planted. The weight of generations of expectations pressed down on him like a physical force. The evening continued like a carefully orchestrated assault. Every question, every comment was designed to highlight the vast gulf between their worlds. Eleanor masterfully directed the conversation, bringing up charity galas, board meetings, and social obligations that were integral to maintaining the Maverick family's position. "Of course, there's the annual Children's Hospital benefit next month," she mentioned casually. "The governor will be attending, along with all our major donors. We'll need to make sure everything is, appropriate. Perhaps some intensive etiquette training would be helpful." Meadow maintained her dignity throughout the dinner, answering each veiled insult with grace. But Maximilian could see the toll it was taking in the slight tremor of her hands, the tension in her shoulders. He wanted to grab her hand and run, to escape back to the simple authenticity of their life in Magnolia Springs. As the dessert plates were being cleared, Eleanor played her final card. "Harrison, please bring in the package from my study." The butler returned with a thick manila envelope, which Eleanor slid across the table toward Meadow. "I took the liberty of having our legal team look into your situation. They found some concerning elements in your past that could potentially affect our family's reputation." Maximilian felt his blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing dramatic, darling," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Just some financial struggles, a few missed payments during college, a distant cousin with a criminal record. Small things individually, but together they paint a rather concerning picture for someone now associated with the Maverick name." Meadow's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "Those struggles made me who I am. I'm not ashamed of my past." "Admirable sentiment," Uncle Richard commented. "But sentiment doesn't protect a century-old legacy. Maximilian, be reasonable. Think about what you're risking. The merger with Thomson Wheeler alone could provide healthcare access to thousands. Are you willing to jeopardize that?" The manipulation was obvious but effective. They knew exactly how to target Maximilian's sense of duty, his desire to make a difference in healthcare. Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall between him and the life he'd chosen with Meadow. After dinner, in the relative privacy of the garden, Meadow finally let her guard down. "They're never going to accept me, are they?" she asked softly, looking up at the same stars that had witnessed their wedding vows just days ago. Maximilian pulled her close, wanting to promise that everything would be fine, that their love could conquer all obstacles. But the evening had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. The weight of his family's expectations, the responsibility to thousands of employees and patients, the legacy he'd been trained since birth to protect. It all pressed down on him with suffocating force. The following weeks brought a relentless campaign of pressure. Eleanor arranged a series of urgent business meetings that kept Maximilian away from home for long hours. The family lawyer regularly sent documents highlighting potential risks to the company's reputation. Board members called with concerns about stock prices and investor confidence. Each day, the distance between Magnolia Springs and his current reality grew larger. The simple joy of their early days together began to feel like a dream, while the pressures of his position became increasingly real. Meadow noticed the change in him, the longer hours, the distracted responses, the way he'd check his phone constantly during their rare moments together. "Talk to me, Max," she pleaded one evening, using the nickname that now felt like it belonged to another person. "What's happening to us?" He wished he had an answer that wouldn't break both their hearts. The man who had proposed by the river, who had vowed to choose love over convention, was being slowly buried under layers of family obligation and societal pressure. Each day, the courage to defy his family's expectations eroded a little more. Eleanor's final strike came in the form of a charity initiative, a program to provide free maternal care to underprivileged communities in rural areas, including Magnolia Springs. The timing was deliberate, the message clear: choose between one woman's happiness and the well-being of thousands. "Think of the lives you could change," Eleanor urged, during yet another late-night meeting. "This is your father's legacy, Maximilian. Are you really willing to risk it all for a summer romance?" The words echoed in his head as he drove home that night, past the hospitals bearing his family's name, past the clinics providing care to those who couldn't afford it elsewhere. The weight of responsibility felt like a noose tightening around his neck, choking the dreams of love and freedom he'd found in Meadow's arms. When he finally arrived home, Meadow was waiting up, her eyes filled with a knowledge he couldn't bear to face. She didn't need to ask where he'd been, didn't need to question the growing distance between them. The answer was written in every hesitation, every unanswered call, every moment he chose duty over love. "Your mother called," she said quietly. "She wanted to make sure I received the investment portfolio she sent over, said it would secure my future, whatever I decide." The implication was clear. They were offering to buy her out of his life. Maximilian felt sick at the realization that his family would go so far, yet a part of him recognized the brutal efficiency of their strategy. They weren't just attacking their marriage, they were systematically dismantling the foundation of his courage to stand against them. The next morning, he left for what he claimed was a business trip, unable to face the truth in Meadow's eyes. She kissed him goodbye with a sadness that suggested she knew what was coming. Perhaps she had known all along that their love story, beautiful as it was, couldn't survive the crushing weight of the Maverick legacy. As his car pulled away from their small apartment, Maximilian caught a final glimpse of Meadow in the rearview mirror. She stood in the doorway, bathed in morning light, looking like everything he had ever wanted and everything he was about to lose. The man who had fallen in love with her in Magnolia Springs would have turned the car around, would have chosen love over legacy without hesitation. But that man was fading, being replaced by the heir his family had spent a lifetime creating, a man who understood duty, who recognized the cost of defying generations of carefully cultivated influence and power. The weight of the maverick name, temporarily lifted by love, settled back onto his shoulders with crushing finality. He didn't know then that Meadow was carrying their children, that his choice would affect not just their lives but the lives of two innocent souls yet to be born. All he knew was that the fairy tale was ending, replaced by the cold reality of family obligations and societal expectations. The text message he would send days later, ending their marriage, would be composed in his family's lawyer's office, each word carefully chosen to seem final, yet blameless. It would break both their hearts, but it would preserve the legacy he had been born to protect. The weight of that legacy, passed down through generations of mavericks, had finally proven too heavy for love to bear. Chapter 5. The Betrayal. The morning Maximilian left carried no warning of the heartbreak to come. Dawn painted Magnolia Springs in hues of pink and gold, the air heavy with the scent of late summer jasmine. Meadow stood in their small kitchen, preparing his favorite coffee just as she had every morning since their wedding. The routine felt sacred, a daily ritual of love expressed through simple gestures. "It's just a week," Maximilian had said, his voice carrying a strain she pretended not to hear. "The Thompson-Wheeler merger needs my personal attention." He kissed her goodbye with a desperation that should have warned her, should have screamed that something was terribly wrong. But love has a way of blinding us to the signs we don't want to see. "Drive safely," she called after him, watching from their doorway as his expensive car disappeared around the corner. The coffee in her hands grew cold as she stood there, fighting an inexplicable urge to run after him, to hold him close and never let go. The first few days of his absence felt different from his previous business trips. His calls became shorter, his texts more formal. The playful emojis and loving nicknames disappeared, replaced by brief business-like messages about delayed meetings and extended stays. Each notification from her phone made her heart race, only to sink when she read the increasingly distant words. On the fourth morning, Meadow woke to an unusual sensation, a flutter in her stomach that wasn't quite nausea, wasn't quite pain. Something felt different in a way she couldn't quite name. The morning light streaming through their bedroom window seemed to mock the emptiness of Maximilian's side of the bed. She made her way to the local clinic, more out of instinct than actual concern. Dr. Sarah Matthews, who had become a friend since Meadow's marriage to Maximilian, noticed her in the waiting room and insisted on seeing her immediately. "How long have you been feeling this way?" Sarah asked, her gentle hands pressing carefully against Meadow's abdomen. "Just this morning, really. I'm sure it's nothing, probably just stress from Max being away." The words caught in her throat, carrying more truth than she intended to reveal. Sarah's eyes held a knowing look as she ordered some tests. "Let's just make sure everything's okay." The wait for results felt eternal, each tick of the clock echoing in the sterile examination room. Meadow's mind wandered to Maximilian, wondering what he was doing at that moment, if he was thinking of her, if he was fighting his family's influence, or slowly surrendering to it. When Sarah returned, her face wore the complex expression of someone bearing news that could be either a blessing or a curse, depending on the circumstances. "Meadow," she said softly, taking a seat beside her friend. "You're pregnant." The words hung in the air like suspended crystals, catching the light and throwing rainbows across her vision. Pregnant, a child. No, The additional tests confirmed. Children, twins, a miracle growing inside her, a physical manifestation of the love she and Maximilian had shared. Joy erupted in her heart, burning away all the doubt and fear of the past few days. This would change everything. Maximilian would come home, would stand strong against his family's prejudices. They would build a life together, raise their children in this small town where love had found them. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, ready to share the miraculous news. The screen lit up with a notification, a message from Maximilian. Her heart soared, then plummeted as she read the words that would shatter her world. "Meadow, I'm sorry. My family has made it clear that our marriage is unacceptable. I can't go against them anymore. You deserve better than this life of constant judgment. Divorce papers will arrive soon. Please understand. I wish you the best." The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the clinic floor. Sarah rushed to her side as Meadow's legs gave way, helping her to a chair as the room spun around her. The joy of moments ago turned to ashes in her mouth. The miracle of new life, now a bittersweet reminder of what she was losing. "He doesn't know," she whispered, her hands instinctively cradling her still flat stomach. "He doesn't know about the babies." Sarah held her as the first tears fell, then the second, then an unstoppable flood. The sobs that tore from her throat carried the sound of dreams shattering, of love betrayed, of a future crumbling to dust. The next hours passed in a blur of concerned faces and gentle voices. Sarah insisted on driving her home, worried about her state of mind. The small apartment, filled with memories of their brief happiness, felt like a museum of broken promises. Every corner held a reminder, his coffee mug in the sink, his jacket thrown over a chair, the photos of their wedding day still scattered on the coffee table. The divorce papers arrived the next morning, delivered by a courier who looked uncomfortable with his task. The thick envelope felt heavy, with more than just legal documents. It carried the weight of shattered dreams, of love surrendered to prejudice and pressure. Meadow sat at their small kitchen table, the morning sun streaming through windows that had witnessed so many happy breakfasts, so many loving moments. The papers before her were cold and formal, reducing their love story to legal terminology and asset divisions. A separate document detailed a generous settlement, hush money essentially, to ensure a quick and quiet end to their marriage. Her hand rested on her stomach, where two tiny hearts beat beneath her own. The children deserved to know their father, deserved the chance to be loved by him. But the man who had sent these papers, who had chosen family expectations over love, was not the same man who had promised to stand by her against any storm. A decision crystallized in her heart, born of both love and pride. She would not tell him about the pregnancy, would not force him to acknowledge children he had already rejected by choosing his family's prejudices over their love. Her babies would grow up knowing they were wanted, cherished, chosen, not obligations that had to be reluctantly acknowledged. The days that followed tested every ounce of strength she possessed. Each morning brought new challenges. Morning sickness that reminded her of her solitude, legal documents that needed attention, well-meaning neighbors whose pitying looks cut deeper than any words could. She threw herself into her work, leading tours with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The historic streets of Magnolia Springs, once the backdrop to their love story, now felt like a stage where she performed the role of someone surviving, someone moving forward, someone not broken by betrayal. The gossip spread through town like wildfire. The wealthy businessman who had married the local girl only to abandon her when his family objected. Some blamed her for reaching above her station, others condemned him for his weakness. Meadow ignored it all, focusing on the tiny lives growing inside her, finding strength in the knowledge that she wasn't truly alone. Late at night, when the world was quiet and her defenses were down, she would sometimes allow herself to remember. The way Maximilian had looked at her during their first meeting, as if she held all the answers to questions he'd never known to ask. The sound of his laugh, real and unguarded, so different from his public persona. The feeling of his arms around her, his promises whispered against her skin. Those memories were both torture and comfort, reminding her that their love had been real, even if it hadn't been strong enough to survive the weight of society's expectations. She tucked them away like precious photographs, to be taken out someday when the pain had dulled enough to allow nostalgia. Sarah and other friends tried to convince her to fight, to tell Maximilian about the babies, to force him to face the consequences of his choice. But Meadow knew that any relationship built on obligation would eventually crumble, leaving even more hearts broken in its wake. Instead, she signed the divorce papers with a steady hand, her signature marking the end of their brief marriage. She accepted the settlement money not for herself, but for her unborn children, establishing a trust fund for their education and future needs. They would never want for anything material, even if they would grow up without a father's love. The wedding ring she removed slowly, reverently, remembering the joy with which it had been placed on her finger. She didn't sell it or throw it away. Instead, she tucked it into a small box along with their wedding photos and Maximilian's love letters. Someday, her children might want to know their history, might need to understand where they came from. As summer faded into autumn, Meadow's body began to show the first visible signs of her pregnancy. She took to wearing flowing dresses that disguised her growing belly, not ready to face the additional gossip that would come with her condition being known. Her tours became shorter as her energy waned, but she refused to stop working, refused to let circumstances define her life. The magnolia trees that had witnessed their love story now shed their leaves, nature's reminder that all seasons must end. But even as the trees stood bare against the autumn sky, new life was preparing to bloom. Meadow found poetry in this, a reminder that endings often carried the seeds of new beginnings. She transformed their small apartment, packing away Maximilian's remaining belongings and preparing a nursery in what had been his home office. The room that had once held his business papers and laptop now filled with soft colors and gentle dreams. 2 cribs, side by side, waited to welcome the new lives that would give purpose to her pain. Each kick and movement from the babies became a reminder of hope, a promise that love, even when broken, could create something beautiful. She spoke to them constantly, telling them stories of their father's goodness, the love that had created them, carefully editing out the pain of betrayal. They would know they were born of love, even if that love hadn't been strong enough to survive. The prenatal appointments she attended alone, each ultrasound image stored carefully in a baby book that might never be shared with their father. She learned she was carrying boys, identical twins who would carry Maximilian's features, a lifetime reminder of both love and loss. As her due date approached, Meadow found strength she never knew she possessed. The pain of betrayal didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else, a quiet determination to create a beautiful life for her children, to show them that love, even when it ends, can leave behind gifts worth treasuring. The text message that had shattered her world remained in her phone, a reminder not of what she had lost, but of what she had survived. She was no longer just Meadow, the tour guide who had fallen in love with a wealthy man. She was becoming something stronger, a mother who would move mountains for her children, a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending was, in fact, a beginning, the start of a different kind of love story, one written not in romantic gestures and wedding vows, but in the quiet strength of a mother's heart, beating in time with the hearts of her unborn children. Chapter 6. Hidden Blessings. The twins arrived on a stormy night in early spring, their first cries mixing with the sound of thunder rolling across Magnolia Springs. After 26 hours of labor, Meadow held her sons for the first time, marveling at how two beings so small could fill her heart so completely. Alexander and Adrian, names she had chosen carefully. Strong names for the beautiful boys who would need all the strength they could get in the years ahead. They were perfect mirrors of each other, with Maximilian's striking features already evident in their tiny faces. Alexander, older by 3 minutes, had entered the world quietly, his eyes wide and watchful. Adrian had announced his arrival with lusty cries that echoed through the delivery room. Together, they were living reminders of both the love she had lost and the blessing she had gained. Sarah Matthews, who had been by her side throughout the pregnancy, served as both doctor and friend during the delivery. As she placed the twins in Meadow's arms, she couldn't help but notice how much they resembled their father. "They're beautiful," she whispered, squeezing Meadow's hand. "You're not alone in this." The first few months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless days. Meadow discovered reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. Between feedings, diaper changes, and the constant needs of 2 infants, she barely had time to breathe, let alone dwell on the pain of Maximilian's absence. The small apartment above the bookstore became a cocoon of love and learning. The twins' room, once Maximilian's office, now held 2 identical cribs, their walls painted with scenes from children's stories. The sound of lullabies replaced the click of laptop keys, and business papers gave way to soft blankets and stuffed animals. The town rallied around them in ways that brought tears to Meadow's eyes. Mrs. Mason from the cafe would send up fresh muffins and coffee on particularly difficult mornings. The bookstore owner, old Mr. Thompson, installed a baby monitor system so Meadow could work part-time in the store while the twins napped upstairs. Sarah made house calls well beyond what was medically necessary, becoming more of an aunt to the boys than their pediatrician. As the twins grew, their distinct personalities emerged like butterflies from chrysalises. Alexander was the thinker, content to observe the world with serious eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Adrian was the adventurer, always reaching for something new, his laughter filling their home with joy. Together, they created a balance that reminded Meadow of the yin and yang symbol, opposite yet complementary forces creating a perfect whole. Their first words came within days of each other, though they couldn't have been more different. Alexander's first word was book, carefully pronounced as Meadow read him a bedtime story. Adrian's was up, demanded imperiously with raised arms and a determined expression. Each milestone was carefully recorded in their baby books, precious memories preserved for a father who might never see them. The settlement money from Maximilian remained largely untouched, saved in trust funds for the boys' future. Meadow was determined to provide for her sons through her own efforts. She expanded her tour guide business, creating specialized historical programs that attracted visitors from across the country. Between tours, she wrote articles for travel magazines, building a reputation as an expert on Southern history and culture. Walking through Magnolia Springs with the twins in their double stroller became a daily adventure. Alexander would point out architectural details with baby fingers, already sharing his mother's love of history. Adrian would wave enthusiastically at everyone they passed, his natural charm winning smiles from even the sternest faces. The boys grew to love the gazebo where their parents had married, though they didn't know its significance. It became their favorite spot for picnic lunches, their little legs dangling through the railings as they watched the world go by. Sometimes, Meadow would catch herself looking for traces of that long-ago wedding day. But the gazebo held its secrets close, witnessed only by the ancient oak trees that stood guard over the square. Questions about their father began around their 3rd birthday, innocent inquiries that pierced Meadow's heart like arrows. "Why don't we have a daddy like Tommy?" Alexander asked one night, his serious eyes searching her face for answers. Adrian, usually the more boisterous twin, had grown quiet, waiting for her response. Meadow had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed her answer countless times. "Your daddy lives far away," she explained, gathering them close. "He has a very important job helping other people." It wasn't entirely a lie. Maximilian's healthcare empire did help thousands. She left out the part about choice, about prejudice, about a love that hadn't been strong enough to overcome society's expectations. The twins accepted this explanation with the simple faith of children, but Meadow knew harder questions would come as they grew older. For now, she focused on filling their lives with so much love that the absence of a father would feel less like a void and more like a footnote to their happiness. Their fourth year brought new challenges and triumphs. The boys started preschool, their matching backpacks and lunchboxes carefully labeled to help teachers tell them apart. Alexander took to learning like a fish to water, already reading simple books by himself. Adrian's natural leadership abilities emerged as he organized playground games and made friends with everyone he met. Meadow watched them grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness. Every new accomplishment, every growing inch, every developing trait was a reminder of what Maximilian was missing. His features became more pronounced in their small faces with each passing month. The way Alexander's brow furrowed in concentration, identical to his father's focused expression, Adrian's dimpled smile that could charm the birds from the trees, just like Maximilian's had once charmed her. The boys developed their own secret language, as twins often do, communicating with glances and gestures that no one else could understand. They were fiercely protective of each other, even at such a young age. If Alexander was feeling shy at a social gathering, Adrian would instinctively move closer, creating a safe space for his brother. When Adrian's adventurous nature led to scrapes and bruises, Alexander was always there first with comfort and band-aids. Their fifth year dawned with an unexpected challenge. The boy's resemblance to Maximilian had grown so strong that strangers often commented on it, not knowing the weight their words carried. "They must look just like their daddy," well-meaning old ladies would say, "or you can really see their father in them." Each comment was a reminder of the secret Meadow carried, the truth she protected for her children's sake. The twins continued to thrive despite, or perhaps because of, the unconventional nature of their family. They excelled in kindergarten, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Alexander's quiet intelligence and Adrian's outgoing nature made them popular with both teachers and classmates. They were invited to every birthday party, included in every playground game, their lack of a father seeming to matter to no one but themselves. Meadow built traditions that were uniquely theirs. Sunday mornings meant pancakes shaped like historical buildings, each breakfast accompanied by stories of the town's past. Holiday seasons brought crafting sessions where they created ornaments and decorations that told their family's story. 3 hearts intertwined, 3 stars shining together, 3 paths merging into one. The boys developed their mother's love of history, though they expressed it differently. Alexander would spend hours poring over old maps and photographs, memorizing dates and facts with remarkable precision. Adrian preferred the dramatic aspects, acting out historical events with elaborate gestures and sound effects, turning their living room into battlefields and town squares of the past. Their 5th birthday party was a testament to how much love surrounded them. The entire town seemed to turn out, bringing gifts and good wishes. The celebration was held in the town square, with the gazebo decorated in superhero themes, the boys' current obsession. As Meadow watched them blow out their candles together, their wishes whispered in perfect synchronization, she felt a deep gratitude for the life they had built. That evening, as she tucked them into their beds, they had refused separate rooms, preferring to share their space as they shared everything else. Adrian asked the question she had been dreading. "Mom, Will we ever meet our daddy? Alexander, already half asleep, opened his eyes at his twin's question. The similarity to Maximilian's gaze was so striking that it took Meadow's breath away. She sat on the edge of their bed, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes," she began, smoothing their dark hair, so like their father's, "grown-ups make choices that are very complicated. Your daddy made a choice before you were born, a choice that meant he couldn't be with us. But that doesn't mean he wouldn't love you if he knew you." "Is that why you look sad sometimes?" Alexander asked, his perceptiveness surprising her. "When you look at our pictures?" Meadow gathered them both into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of their freshly washed hair. "I look at your pictures and see two of the most amazing blessings anyone could ask for. You make me happier than I could ever explain." The twins fell asleep holding hands across the space between their beds, a habit they had developed as infants. Meadow stood in their doorway, watching them sleep, marveling at how these two perfect beings had emerged from the ashes of her broken heart. She avoided the society pages that occasionally mentioned Maximilian's business successes, his charitable works, his expanding healthcare empire. The few times his name appeared in local news, usually in connection with new medical facilities opening in nearby cities, she quickly turned the page or changed the channel. The twins were too young to make the connection between their absent father and the wealthy healthcare mogul making headlines. As she prepared for bed that night, Meadow caught her reflection in the mirror. The young woman who had fallen in love with Maximilian was still there, but she had been transformed by motherhood and circumstance into someone stronger, someone who had learned that love comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful love grows not from passion, but from necessity. The trust funds for the boys continued to grow, untouched except for careful investments in their future. Meadow had long since decided that the money would be revealed to them when they turned 18, along with the full story of their heritage. Until then, she would continue to build a life rich in love, if not in material wealth, showing them that true value lay not in bank accounts or social status, but in the bonds they shared. That night, as a spring storm rolled across Magnolia Springs, so similar to the one that had heralded their birth, Meadow said a quiet prayer of gratitude. The path she walked was not the one she had imagined when she fell in love with Maximilian, but it had led her to a different kind of happiness, a deeper understanding of love's many faces. The twins slept peacefully, their dreams unknown, but their futures bright with possibility. They were their father's sons in looks and certain mannerisms, but they were also uniquely themselves, products of love, resilience, and the unwavering devotion of a mother who had found her greatest strength in their needs. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new moments of joy and growth. But for now, in the quiet of night, Meadow could reflect on the hidden blessings that had emerged from her greatest heartbreak. Her sons were living proof that sometimes life's most precious gifts come disguised as its deepest wounds. Chapter 7. The Empty Victory. Success tasted like ashes in Maximilian Maverick's mouth. 5 years had passed since he'd sent that text message. 5 years of achievements that felt meaningless, of accolades that rang hollow, of a life that looked perfect from the outside but was rotting from within. The evening found him standing in his penthouse office, 60 stories above the city he'd helped shape through his healthcare empire. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of his success. Hospitals bearing the Maverick name, clinics that served thousands, research facilities pushing the boundaries of medical science. The Thomson-Wheeler merger had been just the beginning. Under his leadership, Maverick Family Care had expanded beyond anyone's expectations, becoming a global force in maternal health care. He loosened his tie, a gesture that had become almost compulsive in recent years, as if he were constantly fighting for breath beneath the weight of his choices. The rich mahogany desk held the day's accolades, another Healthcare Innovation Award, a feature in Business Weekly celebrating his vision, an invitation to speak at a prestigious medical conference. All of them felt like props in an elaborate play where he performed the role of the successful heir, the dutiful son, the visionary leader. "Your father would be proud," Eleanor had said earlier that day during their weekly dinner, another ritual that felt more like a performance than a family gathering. She had been referring to the latest expansion, a network of premium maternal care facilities across 3 continents. The pride in her voice had once been all he sought. Now it made him feel physically ill. His mother had gotten everything she wanted. The Maverick name was stronger than ever, their social position unassailable, their influence far-reaching. The scandal of his brief marriage to Meadow had been buried so deeply that it was barely a footnote in society's memory. Yet Eleanor's victory had cost her something she might never recognize: her son's soul. Maximilian walked to the private bar in his office, pouring himself a drink he didn't really want. The amber liquid caught the light of the setting sun, reminding him of another sunset 5 years ago when he'd watched Meadow's figure grow smaller in his rearview mirror. The memory ambushed him at unexpected moments, during board meetings, at charity galas, in the depths of sleepless nights. The photos from that time had all been carefully removed, the mementos packed away, but he couldn't erase the memories. They lived in the marrow of his bones, the sound of Meadow's laughter, the way sunlight played in her hair, the depth of wisdom in her eyes when she spoke about history and justice. Most of all, he remembered the trust he'd seen in her face the morning he left, trust he had betrayed in the most cowardly way possible. His phone buzzed with another notification. Victoria Ashworth, his mother's choice of suitable partner, was texting to confirm their dinner plans. He'd been dating her for the past year, another performance in the endless play of societal expectations. Victoria was perfect on paper. From an old money family, impeccably educated, socially connected. She was also completely wrong for him, a fact they both tacitly acknowledged but never discussed. The relationship was a carefully choreographed dance of mutual convenience. Victoria needed to secure a suitable match before she turned 30. He needed to present the appearance of moving on. They attended events together, made appropriate appearances, and maintained a fantasy that satisfied their families while leaving their hearts untouched. Work had become his refuge and his prison. He threw himself into expansion plans, innovation initiatives, charitable programs, anything to keep the thoughts at bay. Under his leadership, Maverick Family Care had introduced groundbreaking policies for maternal healthcare access, ironically inspired by the very communities he'd encountered in Magnolia Springs. The rural healthcare initiative he'd launched was his pride and joy, though few knew its true inspiration. The program provided state-of-the-art maternal care to underserved communities across the South, including a flagship facility in Alabama. He never asked about its exact location, never checked the patient records, never allowed himself to wonder if Meadow might have benefited from the services he'd helped establish. His executive assistant knocked softly, entering with a stack of documents requiring his attention. Among them was a report from the Rural Healthcare Initiative, complete with statistics about lives improved and communities served. He signed what needed signing, approved what needed approving, all while avoiding the photographs of smiling mothers and newborns that accompanied the report. Later that night, after his obligatory dinner with Victoria, Maximilian found himself doing what he'd promised himself he wouldn't, searching for news of Magnolia Springs. The town's website had been updated since he'd last looked, featuring articles about historical preservation and community events. He scrolled carefully, both dreading and hoping to catch a glimpse of Meadow in the photographs. A featured article about the town's historical tours caught his eye. The writer praised the depth of historical knowledge and engaging presentation style of the tours, though no guide was mentioned by name. Maximilian wondered if Meadow still led those tours, if she still stood beneath the old gazebo telling stories of love and justice to entranced visitors. The gazebo. He minimized the browser window quickly, but not before the memory hit him with physical force. Their wedding day, Meadow radiant in her simple white dress, their vows witnessed by ancient oak trees and small-town neighbors who had accepted their love without question. He had promised to choose her every day, to stand beside her against any storm. Promises that had crumbled like sand castles before the tide of family pressure and societal expectations. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the drink he'd abandoned earlier. The ice had melted, diluting the expensive scotch. A fitting metaphor for how time had diluted but never erased the memory of his time in Magnolia Springs. Those few months with Meadow had been the only authentic period of his life, the only time he'd felt truly himself rather than an actor in his family's grand production. The night stretched before him, another in an endless series of sleepless vigils. His penthouse, decorated by the city's most exclusive designers, felt as soulless as a hotel room. No matter how many premium amenities he added, it never felt like home. Home was a feeling he'd left behind in a small apartment above a bookstore in Magnolia Springs. Tomorrow would bring another day of meetings, decisions, and carefully maintained appearances. He would review expansion proposals, attend charity functions, play his role in the ongoing performance of success. The world would see what it expected to see: Maximilian Maverick, healthcare visionary, worthy heir to a powerful legacy. But in moments like these, alone with his thoughts, he couldn't escape the truth. Every achievement felt tainted by the cost of obtaining it. Every accolade reminded him of the courage he'd failed to show. Every celebration felt like a mockery of the real happiness he'd abandoned. His mother had won, securing the legacy she'd fought so hard to protect. The Maverick name was more prestigious than ever, their influence extending far beyond their original dreams. Yet, in achieving everything they'd wanted, they'd lost something invaluable: the ability to distinguish between success and happiness, between legacy and love. Maximilian moved to the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. Far below, the city lights twinkled like fallen stars, each one representing a life touched by his healthcare empire. He had helped thousands, improved countless lives, made a measurable difference in the world. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that in saving his family's legacy, he had lost his own soul. The man who had fallen in love with Meadow, who had danced with her in an abandoned jazz club and made love to her beneath gauzy curtains, seemed like a character in someone else's story. That version of himself had been real, authentic, alive in a way he hadn't been since. The man who stood in this penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of success, was a carefully constructed facade. His phone buzzed again, his mother this time, reminding him about tomorrow's board meeting. Eleanor's victory had been complete. She had her son back, the Maverick legacy was secure, and the inappropriate marriage that had threatened their social standing was nothing but a distant memory. She would never understand that in winning, she had ensured her son would never truly be happy again. As another sleepless night stretched before him, Maximilian wondered about the life he'd left behind. Did Meadow ever think of him? Had she found happiness with someone else? Someone braver than him? Someone worthy of her love? The questions haunted him, but he never allowed himself to seek answers. He had forfeited that right when he chose family obligation over love. The empty victory of his success echoed through his luxurious penthouse, a constant reminder that all the wealth and influence in the world couldn't fill the void left by true love abandoned. As he stared out at the city he'd helped shape, Maximilian Maverick, heir to a healthcare empire, darling of society pages, pride of his family, felt more alone than ever. Chapter 8. Fate's Hand. Magnolia Springs hadn't changed in 5 years. The same ancient oak trees still lined the historic square, their branches draped with Spanish moss that swayed in the gentle Alabama breeze. Maximilian sat in his parked car, hands gripping the steering wheel, gathering courage to step back into the town that held both his greatest joy and deepest regret. The business trip that brought him here was legitimate, a final inspection of the new maternal care facility his company had built on the outskirts of town. He could have sent someone else, should have sent someone else, but something had drawn him back. Perhaps the same force that had first led him to Meadow 5 years ago. The morning air carried the familiar scent of magnolia blossoms as he finally emerged from his car. He'd chosen casual clothes today, leaving behind the armor of expensive suits that usually defined his public appearances. Something about Magnolia Springs demanded authenticity, even if he'd forgotten how to be authentic himself. Mason's Corner Cafe still occupied its prime spot on the square, the morning crowd spilling onto the sidewalk tables. He avoided looking at the table where he and Meadow had shared their first coffee, where she had opened his eyes to a world beyond social expectations and family obligations. Instead, he headed toward the farmers' market that occupied the square every Thursday morning, just as it had during his time here. That's when he saw them. At first, it was just Meadow, standing at a produce stall, her natural grace unchanged by the passing years. His heart stuttered in his chest, every carefully constructed wall threatening to crumble at the sight of her. She was more beautiful than he remembered, time having added a depth of character to her features that took his breath away. Then he noticed her hands, one holding a shopping basket, the other clasped firmly around something out of view. As she turned slightly, Maximilian's world tilted on its axis. 2 small boys stood beside her, identical in every feature, their dark hair and striking profiles unmistakably reminiscent of his own childhood photographs. They appeared to be about 5 years old, their small hands clutching their mothers while they examined the colorful display of fresh fruit before them. The realization hit him with physical force, causing him to stumble slightly. Twins. His sons. The timing aligned perfectly with their brief marriage, with his cowardly departure. Meadow had been pregnant when he left, carrying his children while he hid behind family obligations and societal expectations. One of the boys, he couldn't tell which, looked up then, his serious expression so familiar it felt like looking into a mirror of the past. The child's eyes widened slightly, perhaps recognizing something of himself in Maximilian's features, before turning back to his brother and mother. Maximilian stood frozen, watching as Meadow interacted with their sons. She knelt between them, helping them select peaches from the display, her movements full of the natural grace and patience he remembered. The boys spoke in excited whispers, their heads bent together in conspiracy, displaying the kind of synchronized behavior unique to twins. The sight of them, this perfect family unit he had unknowingly abandoned, made his chest ache with a pain that threatened to bring him to his knees. Every achievement of the past 5 years, every accolade and success felt meaningless in the face of what he had lost, what he had thrown away. Meadow. Her name escaped his lips before he could stop it. Barely a whisper, but somehow carrying across the morning air. She tensed, her body recognizing his voice before her mind could process it. Slowly, she straightened and turned, instinctively pulling the boys closer to her sides. Her eyes, when they met his, held a storm of emotions, shock, pain, anger, and something deeper he couldn't quite read. "What do you want, Maximilian?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands as she shielded their sons from his gaze. The formal use of his full name struck him like a physical blow. Gone was the intimate Max she had once whispered against his skin. This was Meadow in protective mode, a mother defending her children from potential harm. From him. The boys looked between their mother and this stranger who had caused such a reaction. their identical faces showing matching expressions of curiosity and concern. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. They had his features, but Meadow's gentle eyes, a perfect blend of their parents that made his heart constrict painfully. I didn't know," he managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Meadow, please. I didn't know about them." "Would it have made a difference?" Her question cut through the morning air like a blade. "Would knowing about them have given you the courage your love for me couldn't find?" The boys pressed closer to their mother, sensing her distress. The slightly taller one, or perhaps he just stood more confidently, looked at Maximilian with a directness that reminded him painfully of Meadow. "Mom?" he questioned softly, his young voice carrying a protective note that no 5-year-old should need to express. Meadow's hand, gentle, smoothed his hair, a gesture of reassurance that made Maximilian's chest ache with loss. How many moments like this had he missed? How many firsts had slipped away while he sat in boardrooms and attended charity galas, playing the role of the perfect heir? "It's all right, Adrian," she soothed, before turning back to Maximilian. "This is an old friend of mine." The other twin, Alexander, he would later learn, studied him with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. "You look like us," he observed quietly, his perception cutting straight to the truth with the innocence only a child could possess. Maximilian felt tears threatening to escape. He blinked them back. Years of training in maintaining public composure, warring with the overwhelming emotion of the moment. "I do," he agreed softly, unable to lie to these beautiful boys who carried his features so plainly. The market continued its bustling activity around them, but they stood in a bubble of suspended time, the weight of 5 years of secrets and separation hanging heavy in the air between them. Shoppers moved around their frozen tableau, perhaps sensing the intensity of the moment and giving them space. "We should go," Meadow said finally, gathering her purchases and the boys with practiced efficiency. "Say goodbye to Mr. Maverick." "Goodbye, Mr. Maverick," the twins chorused politely, their synchronized response another reminder of the bond they shared, a bond he had played no part in forming. As they turned to leave, something in Maximilian broke. The carefully constructed walls of propriety and family obligation crumbled completely, leaving only the raw truth of his heart exposed. He fell to his knees, right there in the market square, heedless of the dirt staining his expensive clothes. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking with emotion. "Please, Meadow, I know I don't deserve it, but give me a chance to make things right. Let me know them. Let me try to be worthy of them. Of you." Meadow paused, her back still turned to him. The twins looked back at this man on his knees, their young minds perhaps not understanding the significance of the moment, but recognizing its importance nonetheless. When she finally turned back, her eyes held a mixture of wariness and something else. Perhaps a remnant of the love they had once shared, buried beneath layers of hurt and protection. "You're right," she said quietly. "You don't deserve it. But they might deserve to know their father, if he's truly ready to be one." "I'll do anything," Maximilian promised, still on his knees, uncaring of the spectacle he was creating in the town square. "Whatever conditions you set, whatever you need me to prove, just please, don't let me lose them again." "Again?" Her voice took on an edge. "You never had them to lose, Maximilian. You lost that right when you chose your family's prejudices over our love, over us." The twins were watching this exchange with increasing interest, their identical faces showing matching expressions of confusion and curiosity. Adrian took a small step toward Maximilian, only to be gently pulled back by his brother, already the protective one, even at 5 years old. "If you truly want to be part of their lives," Meadow continued, her voice softening slightly, "we need to talk, but not here, not now. Not in front of them." She pulled a small notepad from her market basket and wrote something quickly. "This is my number. Call tomorrow morning and we'll arrange a time to meet. But Maximilian—" She paused, making sure she had his full attention. "If you're going to do this, it has to be all or nothing. They've lived 5 years without a father. I won't let them experience the pain of having one only to lose him again." Maximilian took the paper with trembling hands, treating it like the precious gift it was, a chance at redemption, at being part of the family he had unknowingly abandoned. "I understand," he said solemnly. "I won't let you down again, any of you." As he watched them walk away, the twins occasionally glancing back at him with undisguised curiosity, Maximilian remained on his knees in the dirt of Magnolia Springs Market Square. The town that had given him everything, that had shown him true love and freedom, had now revealed the full magnitude of what his cowardice had cost him. The morning sun continued its ascent, casting long shadows across the square. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour, their sound unchanged by the 5 years that had passed. But for Maximilian Maverick, kneeling in the dirt of a small Alabama town, nothing would ever be the same again. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, probably his mother or Victoria, or any of the countless obligations that made up his carefully constructed life. For the first time in 5 years, he ignored it completely. The only thing that mattered was the small piece of paper in his hand and the chance at redemption it represented. As he finally stood, brushing dirt from his clothes with shaking hands, Maximilian knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. The careful facades he had built, the compromises he had made, the legacy he had protected at such cost, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of what he had just discovered. His sons, his beautiful, perfect sons, who carried his features but had been raised with Meadows' strength and grace. The thought of them growing up without him, learning to walk and talk and become their own persons while he attended board meetings and charity galas, filled him with a regret so profound it threatened to bring him to his knees again. The path to redemption would not be easy. He could see it in Meadows' eyes. The walls she had built to protect herself and their children, the trust he would have to rebuild, brick by painful brick. But for the first time in 5 years, Maximilian felt truly alive. The numbness that had enveloped him since leaving Magnolia Springs began to thaw, replaced by a determination that burned like fire in his veins. He would do whatever it took to be worthy of them, to earn a place in their lives. Even if it meant defying his family again, even if it meant walking away from the empire he had built, even if it meant dismantling every carefully constructed wall that had protected him from feeling the full weight of his choices. The morning sun reached its full height as Maximilian finally returned to his car. The piece of paper with Meadows' number felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket, a precious key to a future he had never dared to hope for. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Chapter 9. The Path to Redemption. The morning after their encounter in the market square, Maximilian sat in his hotel room, staring at his phone. Meadows' number seemed to pulse on the screen, each digit holding the weight of possibility and fear. It was exactly 9 a.m., not too early to seem desperate, not too late to suggest hesitation. His finger hovered over the call button for a moment before he finally pressed it. She answered on the second ring. "The boys are at school," she said without preamble. "Meet me at the gazebo in 30 minutes. The gazebo. Of course it would be there, where their story had begun, where they had exchanged vows that he had failed to honor. Maximilian arrived early, watching the morning light filter through the ancient oak trees, casting dappled shadows on the weathered wood where they had once promised forever. Meadow approached with measured steps, her sundress moving gently in the breeze, so similar to the day they'd met that it made his heart ache. But her eyes held none of the warmth they had back then. replaced by a careful guardedness that he had put there. "Before we discuss anything," she began, standing at the gazebo steps, "you need to understand that this isn't about us. This is about Alexander and Adrian. Whatever happened between us, they deserve to know their father, if you're truly ready to be one." Maximilian nodded, resisting the urge to move closer to her. "I want to be part of their lives, Meadow. I'll do whatever it takes." "3 conditions," she said, her voice firm. "Non-negotiable. Break any of them, and you'll never see them again." The first condition hit him like a physical blow. Public acknowledgement. Not just of the boys, but of me, of our marriage, of everything you ran from 5 years ago. I won't have them be a secret shame you hide from your world. Maximilian felt the weight of what she was asking. It meant more than just announcing their existence. It meant standing against his family's prejudices, facing the social fallout, risking the business relationships built on his carefully maintained image. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he said quietly. "I'll do it then." The next morning found him standing before the Maverick Family Care Board of Directors, his mother seated at her usual place of prominence. The quarterly meeting had proceeded normally until Maximilian stood for his closing remarks. "Before we conclude," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "there's something I need to share with all of you." He pulled up a photo on the presentation screen, Meadow and the twins at the market, captured by a local photographer who had witnessed their encounter. Eleanor's sharp intake of breath was audible in the sudden silence. "Maximilian," she warned, but he continued, his voice growing stronger. "5 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. I abandoned my wife and my unborn children because I was too weak to stand against prejudice and social expectations. Yesterday, I met my sons for the first time." The boardroom erupted in whispers. Maximilian continued, looking directly at his mother as he spoke. "Alexander and Adrian Maverick are my children, my heirs, and I will no longer pretend they don't exist to protect anyone's outdated prejudices." The second condition came later that day, after the chaos of the board meeting had settled. "Confront your family, not just with words, but with actions. Show the boys that you're willing to stand up against the same prejudices that tore us apart." This proved even harder than the public acknowledgement. Eleanor arrived. At his hotel room in a fury, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "Have you lost your mind?" she demanded. "Do you realize what this will do to our reputation, to the company?" Maximilian met her gaze steadily. "I realize exactly what I'm doing, Mother. I'm choosing my children over prejudice. I'm choosing love over social status. I'm choosing to be a better man than I was 5 years ago." "They're not just your children," Eleanor spat. "They're hers. They'll never be accepted in our world." "Then perhaps it's time for our world to change," Maximilian replied. "The boys are my sons, your grandchildren. Either accept that and be part of their lives, or accept that you'll no longer be part of mine." The third condition was the most challenging. Prove your commitment, not with grand gestures or public statements, but with consistent daily effort. Show them and me that you're here to stay. This meant restructuring his entire life. He moved temporarily to Magnolia Springs, taking an extended leave from direct management of the company. Each morning, he would wait outside the school just to catch a glimpse of the twins arriving. Each afternoon, he would sit in the park across from their apartment, hoping for a chance to slowly become part of their world. The first real interaction came 2 weeks after his public announcement. Meadow allowed him to join them for ice cream after school. The boys were cautiously curious. Full of questions, he struggled to answer honestly while being age-appropriate. "Why didn't you want us?" Adrian asked directly, his ice cream forgotten as he studied Maximilian's face. The question felt like a knife to his heart. "I didn't know about you," he answered truthfully. But that's not an excuse. I should have been brave enough to stay, to be the father you deserved from the beginning. Alexander, quiet and observant as always, asked, "Are you staying now?" "Yes," Maximilian replied without hesitation. "For as long as you and your mother will let me." The days turned into weeks, each small moment a step toward redemption. He learned their routines, their preferences, their personalities. Alexander loved books and could spend hours discussing the historical facts he'd learned from his mother's tours. Adrian was the adventurer, always ready to explore and challenge boundaries. The business world reacted to his announcement with predictable chaos. Stock prices fluctuated, board members threatened to resign, social connections wavered. Maximilian handled it all with a newfound strength, drawing boundaries and making it clear that his children were non-negotiable. Victoria Ashworth, to her credit, gracefully stepped aside. "I always knew your heart wasn't in our arrangement," she said during their final dinner. "Go be with your family. Be happy." The press had a field day with the story. The wealthy heir, the secret marriage, the hidden children. Maximilian gave one comprehensive interview to control the narrative, then focused entirely on earning his place in his sons' lives. Eleanor remained a challenge. She alternated between icy silence and attempts to control the situation. "At least, let me arrange proper schools for them," she insisted. "They need to be prepared for their position." "Their mother has done an amazing job raising them," Maximilian responded firmly. "They don't need to be prepared for anything except being happy, healthy children." Slowly, painfully, progress was made. The twins began to look forward to his visits, to include him in their stories and games. Meadow watched carefully but allowed these interactions to grow naturally, protecting their hearts while giving them space to form their own relationships with their father. The breakthrough came during a school play. Both boys had parts in the production, and Maximilian sat with Meadow in the audience, their first public appearance together since his return. As they watched their sons perform, he felt her hand brush against his, not taking it, but acknowledging his presence, his effort, his change. "They're amazing," he whispered, watching Alexander deliver his lines with perfect timing, while Adrian added enthusiastic gestures to his role. "They are," Meadow agreed softly. "They got that from you, the ability to command attention, to make people listen." "They got their hearts from you," he replied. "Their kindness, their wisdom, their ability to love despite having every reason not to." After the play, as they celebrated with ice cream, becoming something of a family tradition, Adrian looked up at them both and asked, "Are you going to get married again?" The question caught them off guard. Meadow recovered first, smoothing Adrian's hair. "Sometimes grown-up relationships are complicated, sweetheart. Right now, we're focusing on being the best parents we can be for you and your brother." Maximilian nodded in agreement, though his heart ached with the memory of their first marriage, of the love he had thrown away. He knew he had no right to hope for a second chance at that happiness, but being part of their lives, even just as a co-parent, was more than he deserved. The real test came when Eleanor finally demanded to meet her grandchildren. Meadow agreed, but on her terms, a casual lunch at Mason's Corner Cafe on the boys' home turf. Eleanor arrived looking out of place in her designer suit, her discomfort obvious as she faced the family she had once torn apart. The twins, picking up on the tension, stayed close to their mother. But gradually, Alexander's intellectual curiosity and Adrian's natural charm began to work their magic. By the end of lunch, even Eleanor showed signs of thawing, particularly when Alexander displayed knowledge of family history that rivaled her own. "They're remarkable children," she admitted to Maximilian later. Perhaps I was wrong all those years ago." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. The path to redemption wasn't easy, and Maximilian knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to make up for his past mistakes. But with each small step, each moment shared with his sons, each careful rebuild of trust with Meadow, he felt more like the man he should have been 5 years ago. The gazebo still stood in the town square, witness to their story's beginning and now its potential for healing. Sometimes, when Maximilian watched his sons playing beneath its weathered roof, he caught Meadow looking at him with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, wasn't quite love, but held the possibility of both. It was enough. It had to be enough. He had been given a second chance to be part of this family, and this time he wouldn't let anything tear them apart. Chapter 10. Standing Tall. The annual Maverick Family Care Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the social season, bringing together the most influential figures in healthcare, business, and society. This year, the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel sparkled with additional significance. It would be the stage for Maximilian's most public declaration of his commitment to Meadow and their children. The preparation had been meticulous. Meadow stood before her mirror in a suite upstairs, her simple elegance a stark contrast to the ornate luxury surrounding her. The boys, handsome in matching suits tailored to echo their father's style, fidgeted as their mother adjusted their bow ties. "Remember," she told them gently, "no matter what happens tonight, you are loved, you are wanted, you belong exactly where you are." Maximilian paced in his own suite, his heart racing with anticipation. The speech he had prepared felt simultaneously inadequate and overwhelming. How do you apologize to the world for 5 years of cowardice? How do you declare your love and commitment in a way that heals old wounds without creating new ones? Eleanor had tried one final time to prevent this public acknowledgement. She'd arrived at his suite an hour earlier, her face tight with barely controlled emotion. "Think about what you're doing," she'd pleaded. "By all means, acknowledge the children privately. Set up trust funds, arrange for their education. But this public spectacle, it will destroy everything we've built." Maximilian had looked at his mother, really looked at her, and saw for the first time the fear behind her pride. "No, Mother," he'd said gently. "It will rebuild everything I destroyed 5 years ago. The only question is whether you'll be part of that rebuilding." Now, as the ballroom filled with the city's elite, Maximilian stood at the entrance, greeting guests with practiced charm, while his heart thundered in his chest. The whispers had already started. Word of Meadow and the twins' presence in the hotel had spread through social circles like wildfire. Victoria Ashworth arrived with her new fiancé, offering Maximilian a genuine smile of support. She had become an unexpected ally in recent weeks, using her social influence to pave the way for tonight's announcement. "Give them hell," she whispered as she passed, squeezing his arm encouragingly. The board members were scattered throughout the room, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. The Thomson-Wheeler representatives huddled in a corner, clearly discussing the implications of what they'd heard was coming. The press, usually kept to a minimum at these events, seemed to have multiplied, sensing something momentous in the air. At precisely 8 o'clock, Maximilian took the stage. The usual awards and acknowledgements had been abbreviated to make room for what everyone now suspected was coming. The room hushed as he approached the microphone, hundreds of eyes fixed on his face. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady, despite his racing heart. "For 5 years, I've stood on this stage and spoken about Maverick Family Care's commitment to mothers and children. I've talked about our mission to support families, to provide care to those in need, to break down barriers that prevent access to health care." He paused, his eyes finding Meadow and the twins at their designated table. They had entered quietly during dinner, but their presence had caused a ripple of whispers and stares. The boys sat tall in their chairs, their identical faces showing a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Meadows' expression was carefully neutral, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Tonight, I need to acknowledge my own failure to live up to those values. 5 years ago, I made a choice that betrayed everything our company claims to stand for. I abandoned my wife and my unborn children because I lacked the courage to stand against prejudice and social expectations. The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Eleanor, seated at the prime table, went pale but held her position with rigid dignity. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My wife, Meadow, whom I married in Magnolia Springs, Alabama, faced pregnancy and motherhood alone because I chose family reputation over love. My sons, Alexander and Adrian, spent the first 5 years of their lives without a father because I was too weak to stand up for what was right. He gestured toward their table, and the spotlight swung to illuminate Meadow and the twins. The boys blinked in the sudden light, but maintained their composure, a trait they'd inherited from both parents. Meadow met the room's stares with quiet dignity. "Look at them," Maximilian continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at these beautiful, intelligent, amazing children. Look at the strong, gracious woman who raised them alone. Who among us has the right to judge their worth based on social status or background?" The silence in the room was deafening. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling, caught up in the raw emotion of the moment. Tonight, I'm not just acknowledging my family, I'm apologizing to them. I'm declaring my commitment to spend the rest of my life making up for my cowardice, and I'm challenging every person in this room to examine their own prejudices, their own assumptions about worth and value. He stepped away from the podium, walking down to where his family sat. The twins watched him approach with wide eyes, while Meadows' expression softened slightly. "Alexander, Adrian," he addressed his sons directly, his voice carrying in the silent room. "I want you to know that I am proud to be your father. I want everyone here to know that you are my sons, my heirs, and that I love you more than anything in this world." He turned back to the room, one hand resting gently on each boy's shoulder. "These children are the future of Maverick Family Care. They represent everything we claim to stand for, the breaking down of barriers, the triumph of love over prejudice, the importance of family over social status." The reaction was immediate and varied. Some guests stood and applauded, led by Victoria and a few younger board members. Others remained seated, their disapproval evident in their rigid postures. The press photographers' cameras clicked frantically, capturing every moment of this unprecedented scene. Eleanor rose slowly from her seat, all eyes turning to watch her response. She walked with measured steps toward their table, her expression unreadable. The room held its breath, waiting to see how the Maverick matriarch would handle this public challenge to everything she had spent years protecting. She stopped before her grandchildren, studying their faces with an intensity that made both boys straighten in their chairs. Then, to everyone's surprise, she knelt down to their eye level, something no one had ever seen Eleanor Maverick do. "I owe you an apology as well," she said, her voice carrying in the silent room. "I let fear of change blind me to the treasure of having grandchildren. I hope you'll give me the chance to know you." Adrian, always the more outgoing twin, smiled tentatively. "Dad says you know lots of stories about our family history. Alexander loves history." Eleanor's composure cracked slightly, a genuine smile softening her features. "I would love to share those stories with both of you." The tension in the room broke. Conversations resumed, though now centered entirely on the drama that had unfolded. The press would have a field day, but Maximilian didn't care. He had done what needed to be done, declared his love and commitment to his family in a way that couldn't be ignored or hidden. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, Meadow found him on the hotel's terrace. The boys had fallen asleep in a private room upstairs, exhausted from the excitement and emotion of the evening. "That was quite a speech," she said, joining him at the railing. The city lights sparkled below them, a fitting backdrop for this moment of truth. "I meant every word," he replied, turning to face her. "I know it doesn't make up for the past 5 years, but I needed everyone to know, especially you and the boys, that I'm never running away again." Meadow was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city. "It's a start," she finally said. "The boys were proud of you tonight. They've never had anyone stand up for them so publicly before." "I'll spend the rest of my life standing up for them," Maximilian promised, "for all of us." The silence between them was comfortable, filled with possibility rather than pain. Somewhere in the ballroom, Eleanor was already doing damage control with key board members and investors. The press would be crafting their headlines, social circles would be buzzing with gossip, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But here on the terrace, with the woman he loved and their children sleeping peacefully upstairs, none of that seemed to matter. For the first time in 5 years, Maximilian felt truly at peace with who he was and where he belonged. The next few weeks would bring both support and backlash. Several board members resigned in protest, while others stepped up to defend the company's new direction. Stock prices fluctuated as the market reacted to the scandal, but Maximilian remained steady in his commitment. He established a new corporate initiative focused on breaking down social barriers in healthcare access, using his own story as a catalyst for change. The twins became regular visitors to his office, their presence a visible reminder of the company's commitment to family values that went beyond surface appearances. Eleanor, true to her word, began the process of getting to know her grandchildren. It wasn't always smooth. Years of ingrained prejudices didn't disappear overnight, but she made genuine efforts to change, to understand, to accept. The gala became a turning point in more ways than one. It marked not just Maximilian's public acknowledgement of his family, but the beginning of real change in their social circles. Other families, inspired by his courage, began to challenge old prejudices and restrictions. Meadow watched these changes with cautious optimism, protecting the boys while allowing them to embrace their expanded world. She maintained their home in Magnolia Springs, ensuring they stayed grounded in the values and community that had supported them from the beginning. The press eventually moved on to other stories, but the impact of that night lingered. Maximilian had done more than just acknowledge his family. He had taken a stand against the very prejudices that had once controlled his life. He had chosen love over legacy, truth over social acceptance, and in doing so, had created a new legacy more valuable than anything he had protected before. Standing tall meant facing consequences, but it also meant finally being true to himself and his heart. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in 5 years, it was the right path, the path that led home. Chapter 11. Healing Hearts. Healing began in the quiet moments, in the small steps that bridged 5 years of absence. After the grand declarations at the gala, Maximilian focused on the daily work of earning his place in his family's life. He rented a small house near Meadow's apartment in Magnolia Springs, close enough to be present, but far enough to respect the boundaries she needed. Morning walks to school became their sacred ritual. At first, Alexander and Adrian stayed close to their mother, uncertain of this father who had suddenly appeared in their lives. But gradually, their natural curiosity overcame their caution. Adrian would race ahead, pointing out discoveries along their route, while Alexander walked beside Maximilian, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his old soul. Did you always want to help people? Alexander asked one morning, his serious expression mirroring his father's own. The question stopped Maximilian in his tracks, forcing him to consider his honest answer. I wanted to live up to expectations, he admitted, but watching you and your brother, you've taught me what really matters. You live to help people because it's in your hearts, not because anyone expects it of you. The term "dad" first slipped out during their third week of walks. Adrian, excited about a science project, called out, "Dad, look!" before freezing, uncertain how Maximilian would react. The moment hung between them until Maximilian responded naturally, acknowledging both the title and the trust it represented. Meadow watched these interactions carefully, her heart both warming and hurting at the sight of her sons bonding with their father. She saw how Maximilian never pushed, never tried to buy their affection with expensive gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he offered what they truly needed: his time, his attention, his genuine interest in their lives. The healing extended beyond their morning routine. Maximilian attended every school event, every sports practice, every small moment that made up their daily lives. He sat through Alexander's detailed historical explanations, played soccer with Adrian's boundless energy, and slowly became a steady presence they could count on. Eleanor's transformation surprised them all. The maverick matriarch, once so rigid in her prejudices, began to soften in the face of her grandchildren's natural charm. Her visits to Magnolia Springs became regular, each time bringing not expensive gifts, but family photographs and stories that captivated both boys. Your father had your same look, she told Alexander, showing him a childhood photo of Maximilian absorbed in a book. To Adrian, she brought tales of maverick ancestors who had been pioneers and adventurers, watching his eyes light up with excitement. The business world shifted around them. Maximilian restructured Maverick Family Care's leadership, promoting diverse voices and establishing policies that reflected their commitment to breaking down social barriers. The twins became regular visitors to the corporate offices, their presence a living reminder of the company's transformed values. But the deepest healing happened in unplanned moments, like the rainy Saturday when Maximilian transformed their living room into an indoor camping adventure, complete with blanket forts and storytelling. When Adrian asked about how his parents met, Maximilian caught Meadow's eye before sharing their love story, edited appropriately for young ears. Your mother was the most beautiful tour guide in Magnolia Springs, he began, watching Meadow's expression soften at the memory. She knew how to make people see the heart of things, not just their surface. There were difficult moments too. Times when old pain surfaced unexpectedly, like when Adrian asked why they couldn't all live together like his friend Tommy's family, or when Alexander questioned whether their father would leave again if his family disapproved of something else. These moments required honest conversations, age-appropriate explanations of complex adult situations. Maximilian never made excuses for his past actions, but focused on proving through consistent presence that he had changed. The breakthrough in Meadow's healing came during a parent-teacher conference. Sitting side by side, listening to their sons' teachers praise their progress, Meadow found herself sharing memories of earlier conferences she had attended alone. "I used to imagine you there," she admitted quietly. "In the empty chair beside me, sharing in their achievements. I would be so angry at you for missing it, and then feel guilty for still wanting you to be part of these moments." Family dinners became regular occurrences, first at restaurants, then at Meadow's apartment. The twins delighted in having both parents at their table, creating new memories to replace the void of the past. Eleanor joined these dinners occasionally, each visit marking another step in her own journey of growth. One evening, after the twins had gone to bed, Maximilian and Meadow sat on her small balcony, looking out over the town that had brought them together, torn them apart, and now witnessed their healing. "They're incredible, Meadow," Maximilian said softly. "You've raised them to be everything I should have been. Strong, authentic, unafraid to love." "They're their father's sons too," she replied. "They have your determination, your ability to learn from mistakes, your capacity for growth. They're the best of both of us." The healing continued, day by day, moment by moment. Each shared experience added another layer of trust, another bond strengthened. The wounds of the past didn't disappear, but they began to scar over, becoming part of their story rather than its defining moment. The gazebo in the town square stood witness to their healing, just as it had witnessed their love and their separation. Sometimes, during their evening walks, the family would stop there, the boys playing while their parents watched, remembering the vows spoken there and the new promises being kept. Healing, they discovered, wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future strong enough to bear its weight. Each day brought new opportunities for growth, new chances to choose love over fear, truth over appearance, family over expectation. The journey wasn't over, but the path ahead was clear. They were writing a new chapter in their story, one where past mistakes became stepping stones to wisdom, where love proved stronger than any social barrier or past regret. Chapter 12. Sweet Justice. The sweetest revenge isn't served cold. It blooms like magnolias in spring, natural and unstoppable. On the 5th anniversary of Maximilian's return to his family's life, Maverick Family Care held its annual charity gala in an unexpected location, the town square of Magnolia Springs, with the historic gazebo as its centerpiece. The transformation was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from ancient oak trees there, light mingling with thousands of tiny fairy lights that turned the square into an enchanted garden. White tables dotted the lawn, each scented with arrangements of fresh magnolias. The gazebo, where Maximilian and Meadow had first married 10 years ago, stood illuminated like a beacon of second chances. But this wasn't just another corporate event. Tonight would mark the official launch of the Meadow Maverick Foundation, a billion-dollar initiative dedicated to breaking down social barriers in healthcare and education. The foundation's first act would be the establishment of free maternal care centers in underserved communities across the South, each one staffed and run with the same principles of equality and dignity that Meadow had always embodied. The guest list was a deliberate blend of worlds. Corporate leaders sat beside local townspeople, society figures mingled with community activists. Eleanor Maverick, elegant as ever but softer now, watched with pride as her grandsons, now 10 years old, helped guide guests to their seats. Alexander and Adrian had grown into remarkable young boys, combining their father's business acumen with their mother's compassionate wisdom. They moved through the crowd with natural grace, their matching suits and identical features drawing admiring glances. But it was their confidence, their absolute certainty of their place in both worlds, that truly commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maximilian began his address, standing in the same gazebo where he had once promised to love Meadow forever. 10 years ago I stood in this very spot and made vows I failed to keep. 5 years ago I discovered that my greatest failure had led to my greatest blessing, my sons. Tonight, we're here to ensure that no other family faces the barriers that once tore us apart. Meadow, stunning in a gown that echoed the simplicity of her wedding dress, stood beside him. Her hand found his as he continued, "The Meadow Maverick Foundation isn't just about healthcare access. It's about transforming the very system that perpetuates prejudice and inequality. Every center we build will stand as a testament to the truth that love knows no social boundaries." The announcement that followed sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Maverick Family Care would become the first major healthcare company to implement a revolutionary pricing model. Wealth would no longer determine the quality of care received. The company's substantial profits would ensure that every patient, regardless of social status, received the same premium services. But the real justice came in the details that followed. Every board member who had once supported the prejudices that separated Maximilian and Meadow found their positions replaced by diverse voices from the communities they served. The old guard of social elite who had looked down on Meadow now watched as she took her place as co-CEO. Her experience in building bridges between communities proving invaluable to the company's new direction. Eleanor's role in this transformation proved surprisingly pivotal. She stood to address the crowd, her voice carrying the weight of decades of tradition about to be upended. "I once believed that protecting our social position was more important than protecting love," she admitted. "My prejudice cost my son 5 years with his children, cost this company years of authentic purpose, and cost our family the joy we now know. Tonight, we right those wrongs." The twins, watching from their parents' side, bore witness to this moment of justice with the wisdom of children who had lived in both worlds. They saw how their mother's strength had transformed not just their father, but an entire corporate culture. They understood that their very existence was a testament to love's power to transcend social barriers. The evening's most powerful moment came when Meadow took the microphone. Her voice, clear and strong, carried across the hushed square. 10 years ago, I was a tour guide who fell in love with a man, not a name or a fortune. 5 years ago, I was a single mother protecting her children from the prejudice that had driven away their father. Today, I stand before you not as someone who overcame these barriers, but as someone committed to tearing them down completely. The Foundation's first year's budget, she announced, would be funded entirely by redirecting the money once spent on maintaining social appearances. The private clubs, the exclusive memberships, the symbols of segregation that had for so long defined their world. The very instruments of prejudice would now serve to dismantle it. Justice manifested in other ways too. The story of their family became a catalyst for change across the industry. Other companies, facing pressure from shareholders and the public, began examining their own biases and barriers. The social circles that had once ostracized Meadow now sought her guidance on authentic inclusion and community building. The old board members who had resigned in protest of Maximilian's changes watched from the sidelines as Maverick Family Care's stock soared, driven by overwhelming public support for their new mission. Their attempts to start competing ventures failed as the market embraced the authenticity and purpose that Meadow and Maximilian's partnership represented. But perhaps the sweetest justice was visible in the smaller moments of that evening. In the way Alexander and Adrian moved confidently between social groups, equally comfortable with corporate leaders and local townspeople. In how Eleanor beamed with genuine pride as she introduced her grandchildren to everyone she met. In the natural authority Meadow commanded, not through social position, but through the wisdom and compassion that had always been her true strength. As the evening wound down, Maximilian and Meadow found themselves alone in the gazebo, the fairy lights twinkling above them like stars. Their sons played nearby, with friends from both their worlds, their laughter a testament to the barriers they had helped break down. "Do you remember what you told me the day I came back?" Maximilian asked softly. "About having 3 conditions for my return." Meadow nodded, a smile playing at her lips. "I think we've finally fulfilled them all," he continued. "Public acknowledgement, standing up to prejudice, proving commitment through consistent action, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being about meeting conditions and started being about building something better than what we lost." "We didn't just want revenge," Meadow agreed, watching their sons. "We wanted transformation, not just for us, but for every family that might face the same barriers." The justice they had achieved wasn't about destroying the old world, but about building a new one. Every maternal care centre they would build would stand as a monument to love's victory over prejudice. Every family they would help would add another chapter to their story of transformation. The gentle breeze carried the scent of magnolia blossoms, just as it had on their wedding day, just as it had when Maximilian had first returned. But now it carried something else too. The promise of a future where love wouldn't have to be sacrificed for legacy, where children wouldn't have to choose between worlds, where authenticity would matter more than appearance. As the last guests departed, the twins rejoined their parents in the gazebo. The family stood together, illuminated by starlight and fairy lights, their unity a living testament to love's power to heal, transform, and ultimately triumph. Their revenge hadn't been about destruction, but about creation. They hadn't just torn down barriers, they had built bridges. They hadn't just overcome prejudice, they had transformed it into purpose. And in doing so, they had written a new kind of love story, one where justice came not through vengeance, but through the unstoppable power of love to change hearts, heal wounds, and build a legacy worth passing on. The gazebo would continue to stand in Magnolia Springs, now not just as a monument to their love story, but as a symbol of transformation possible when courage meets compassion, when love overcomes fear, when truth triumphs over tradition. And in years to come, their story would be told not as one of revenge, but as proof that sometimes the greatest justice comes not from defeating your opponents, but from transforming the very world that once tried to keep you apart.